It is 5:30 p.m. on Monday, June 6th, and I'd like to call this work session to order. Up first, we have city updates, so Ms. Milano, please take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair, councilors, and Mayor Gradisar. I have a few updates from the city this evening. The first is a COVID update with some numbers from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, showing the 1 week cumulative positive case counts for Pueblo County at 163.3, with a 1 week positivity rate of 5.3. And Pueblo County has 8 days of stabilized COVID-19 hospitalizations as of the date of this afternoon's report, which is down from what it had been. So there's been a few more hospitalizations due to COVID. Just another update that on the work session dated July the 11th, coming up next month, Dr. Brad Roberts, the new medical officer for the City County Health Department, will be attending the work session for a meet and greet introduction with our health director, Andy Evans, and they'll also be prepared to provide a COVID update a month from now. I do have an ARPA update, but it's only that we are still on day-to-day deposit watch. And so I think the mayor is planning to send out the notice once the deposit hits, and they are checking in the accounting office twice a day, mornings to ensure that it's hit the deposits, and in the evening to see what's in the queue. So we're anticipating that deposit anytime and any day. Third update is the community satisfaction survey. I believe last week the mayor sent out the link to the survey for all of you. We are working on a press release and to place the survey results on the city's website and also notify through social media. The mayor scheduled a community connections on Friday morning, August the 8th at the Riverwalk Betcher Amphitheater, and would invite all of you to attend as well as the community, give them plenty of opportunity to have access to the survey and to be able to answer questions or ask questions in advance. And then we also scheduled a work session presentation to City Council that is a televised night, I believe, on August the 8th for an update of the community satisfaction for 2022. I saw Councilor Winter is on Zoom. I wanted to make sure that all of you had received the reports that she'd asked for the Aquatic Center, the update on the DOLA grant, the East Side Ball Field, and the reconciliation of expenditures to date, the Potluck building and its original approval, as well as where the subsequent funding sources were distributed to. There has been a work session that is in the process of being scheduled for Jeff Shaw to provide the PEDCO updates on the 2 items she requested. There is, I think Councilor Vicente Martinez Ortega is working with Steve Meyer on a resolution for the Bessemer Plants, Flowers, and Lights for the rest of this year, with plans to include those costs in the annual budget for Parks and Recs and the Horticulture Division after this 2023 budget cycle. And the last update is Anna's been out ill, so as soon as she returns, we will plan to schedule the update, whether it's quarterly now or mid-year, on a financial status update for the city. And I think those are the items that Councilor Winter had asked for updates on. That does conclude my updates, the city's updates for this evening. And do you have any questions of me or requests that I could provide reports for before next week's meeting?
Thank you, Ms. Milano, for all those updates. What questions are there from council? Councilor Atencio.
Yeah, I have one on our council events. We have the HPH golf tournament. Let me tell you a little story. In my first year as on the executive board of CML, CML used to have a golf tournament during their annual conference. It just so happened that Channel 9 from Denver was at the conference, and they highlighted me as being one of the grifters of city governments that are taking advantage of our constituents' money playing golf on their dime. Not a good idea. You can imagine some of my sister and brother and some of my family members in Denver sitting down to 6 p.m. news conference, and there I am, big as life on their television screens, being highlighted as elected official taking advantage of our constituents playing golf on their money. So it's not a good idea. I played in the DHPH golf tournament, but I paid for it myself, and we shouldn't expect our constituents to pay for our golf. Just saying.
I would agree with that, Larry.
So it sounds like the direction is to maybe take it off. Or Counselor
think, yeah.
Atencio.
Yeah, I would think. It's, if Channel 9 had the audacity to call me out on that, I think somebody else would call us out on that.
Well, I think the proper approach is, I don't think you need to take it off here, but if anybody wants to play, they need to understand it's on their dime. Even like the Chambers golf tournaments, I feel the same way about that. Petco's golf tournament, I feel the same way about that. You want to play, I think that's fine, but you pay for it out of your own pocket. That's how we've handled them, and that's how I think they should be handled.
Madam Chair, I'll request that the mayor's staff office changes the title to DHPH Golf Tournament Self-Pay with the duties, with the detail there. And instead of RSVP, we can collect, just put self-pay around it.
Noted. Thank you, Ms. Solano. Counselor
Yeah,
Flores.
most golf tournaments, because my wife used to do a lot of this when she was still alive, and they were fundraisers. And for the nonprofits, it became an important fundraising activity, which, you know, in most cases brought a significant amount of money. They never really made money on the golf fees or any of that stuff. It was always the sponsorships that they were after. And I don't know where you draw the line. I mean, if we go to a dinner, I mean, the fact that we're getting a dinner, is that equivalent to playing a round of golf? I mean, we got to think golf and dinner are two different things. Well, I'm just saying. Yeah. So, but I mean, I've never felt guilty in sponsoring a golf tournament, just knowing the fundamental fact that money was important as a fundraiser for that nonprofit. But that's my opinion. I learned my lesson.
Any other questions or comments for Ms. Solano? Counselor Winter? Anything? Seeing none, I'm going to move forward to our next agenda topic, which is really kind of the meat and potatoes of today's meeting. It's all around child advocacy. So kind of to tee us off, because we were just talking about golf. You get it. To tee us off, I'm going to throw it to Counselor Flores.
Thank you. Thank you also for allowing me to introduce this next topic. You know, in the beginning of January, I thought it would have been a good idea in the city to have a summit of some sort involving the crime that was occurring in our community, and maybe having a 2-day summit to bring everybody together. And over the last 4 or 5 months, I determined that wasn't a very good idea. It was like being served an elephant, and where do you take the first bite? You know, it's such a big topic. And so I took it upon myself to think about our work sessions and the ability to be able to have a smaller discussion on a smaller topic. In this particular case, I felt that maybe, you know, the first thing that we should tackle and look at is child abuse and neglect. And it was really Mr. Grant, who runs CASA, that he made a comment that really stuck with me. And that was, I didn't, and he'll be able to explain whether or not there's been an increase in Pueblo County of 31%, or whether that was a workload for his organization, and we'll clarify that later. But it's something that I think that the city needs a mirror. And I think people, you know, like they like to believe, just like I do sometimes, that it doesn't exist. But sometimes it's important that the community understand what is really happening. And so I made the decision that that was going to be one of the topics for a full work session like it is tonight. I am going to follow a very strict, narrow focus on this. I don't want to get out. There's been talk about maybe including domestic violence in this conversation, but I think that's a topic that needs to be taken up separately. And I know that they're tied in sometimes, but I think it deserves its own period on our work session. And I think that we've discussed that probably happening in the next couple of months. We're very fortunate that we have, people that deal in that. And I can't thank all of you that appear tonight for, breaking up your evening here and coming to work session and helping us kind of understand what the problems are, how you see it from your vantage point, what you think maybe needs to be done that's not being done. Are the laws in Colorado sufficient? I mean, do we need our delegation to be looking at maybe some stricter things that could help our children? It's just kind of an open topic about how you see this issue in our community and what we can do to maybe, lessen the impact on our children. I did get a little bit of information about child abuse, and it's a big issue. It's a big problem. And child abuse is sometimes called maltreatment, and that didn't seem a harsh enough word to me. But it's important to understand that to reduce the risk of abuse of children, we have to be familiar with the signs of abuse and neglect. And one of the things that I want to tell our community is that this is an issue for everyone that lives in Pueblo. If you're a teacher in District 60, because I served on the school board, there's a law that requires them to notify authorities if they suspect or they see that there is abuse going on with the children that they're teaching. It's unbelievable, but there's about 4 million cases of child abuse and neglect involving 7 million children every year in the United States. It's a mind-boggling number. And the majority of the cases that are reported to Child Protective Services in every community in the United States involves neglect. It involves neglect, period, but is followed by physical and sexual abuse. And then you have the overlapping situation where they're all combined. So I appreciate all of you being here and sharing your expertise and also giving us maybe some direction of how we, tackle the problem or reduce the problem, and also giving the community the facts of what's really happening in our community. And I'm pleased to, and I think the format that I want to follow is that we'll let all of you make your presentations, and we've set aside a half an hour for questions. So as you see each department here that's here, make sure you write your questions down, and then at the end we'll be able to ask questions. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our Pueblo Police Chief, Chris Noller, and he's brought along Dan Anderson. He's a captain with the Pueblo Police Department. Or are you a solo tonight?
Sorry, I didn't take into account Captain Anderson had a scheduled vacation, so I have Sergeant Nolan Welsh and Sergeant Mike Slattery here with me.
Okay, is Sergeant Nolan Welch here? Oh, okay, you're in the white shirt, Chief. Okay. And then you'll introduce the other gentleman. I don't have his name.
Sergeant Mike Slattery.
Okay, he's on Zoom.
He's right here.
Oh, okay. They're both there.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here, Chief.
Absolutely. I do have a PowerPoint that we put together with the help of these two gentlemen back here. They're the brains of the operation. All right, if you'll allow me, we'll go through this a little bit. Patrol officers in the Special Victims Unit, detectives are primarily involved in the investigation of child abuse and child sexual abuse cases at our department. Our SVU detectives receive intensive training in these subjects to include child forensic interview techniques. Currently, the SVU unit, Special Victims Unit, has 5 detectives assigned to it. 2 of these detectives are currently on injury leave or light duty. The next slide talks about the mandatory reporting requirements. And there's a number of other people that are included in this mandatory reporting, but the primary ones that we focused on were the medical professionals, educational facilities staff, which is the teachers, as you referred to them a minute ago, and other people that work in an educational facility, mental health professionals, veterinarians, law enforcement officers, obviously, social services personnel, DHS, and athletic coaches are amongst those that we highlighted. And the reason why we highlighted these is with COVID, as we're going to talk about, there was a lot of those mandatory reporters who didn't get firsthand face-to-face contact with a lot of kids. Most reports come to the Pueblo Police Department through the schools, through our SRO officers or the school teachers, and obviously also Department of Human Services. This next slide kind of shows where we've been since 2017 with child abuse incidents reported per year. We've kind of gone up and down. The 2018 numbers, we had a 15% increase from 2017 to 2018, and then those numbers started tapering off. Some of this is likely due to COVID, but it's hard to tell how much of that number is due to COVID. As you look at 2017, there's still quite a disparity between the 2017 and 2018. So the yearly reports fluctuate quite a bit. This is so far this year, we've had 68 reports from January 1st through May 30th, which is a 39% increase just in this first 5 months of the year, which is alarming, I think. But again, that may also be indicative to the kids are back in school, most of them full-time in face-to-face learning, and athletics are back up. And so some of those mandatory reporters that we didn't have for the 19, 20, and 21 school year, that contact, I think we're starting to see the results of the students being back in those environments. Between 2017 and 2021, we saw a 63% decrease in child enticement, luring, and exploitation, which is different than the child abuse cases. Unfortunately, as Mike Slattery or Sergeant Slattery pointed out, this is probably driven by COVID again, in the removal of children from physical presence of mandatory reporters. The Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, or ICAC, which we have a task force officer in the SVU unit assigned to, estimated a 73% increase nationwide in the number of reports between 2019 and 2021. The ICAC reports are broken down into priority 1 and 2 cases. Priority 1 is a strong possibility of an abuse having happened or likely to happen. And priority 2 is more of somebody trying to lure a child, but it's not as it's serious. Don't misunderstand me, but it's not as serious as the priority 1, where that luring has already happened and an assault is either imminent or has happened already. So these are the cases that we've seen here in Pueblo at the police department, sent from 2017 through 2021. And again, you can see those decreases over the years. Some of those are pre-COVID, and some of those were during COVID. So it's kind of hard to, the advent of COVID, or however you want to say that, has made it very difficult to tell what is affecting these types of crimes, especially when it comes to children. Because did the crime go down because they weren't in school, or did, it's hard to tell if that's the cause of the decrease. Again, this is January through May of this year. We've had 27 cases of child enticement, luring, or exploitation, whereas last year we had 67 during the same time period. In 2021, as we just showed, the ICAC task force officer received 64 reports of child enticement, luring, and exploitation. This year so far, we've received 27. Some suspected reasons, like we talked about, are those who work from home, meaning the perpetrators can increase their online time and delve into child sexual venues that they might not be able to if they were in a supervised work environment. Also, I think with the advent of online schooling, it probably gives the opportunity to the younger kids to be in those places where these pedophiles could try to make contact with them. So I think we got to increase from both sides. Obviously, that makes for a greater opportunity to make personal contact with the juveniles. The other section we'll talk about is child sexual abuse. Those numbers have really statistically been fairly consistent from 2017 through 2021, and they're alarming. Obviously, 82 cases of child sexual assault on a child reports. That's a large number. 2018 seems to be the outlier, but the others were within 5% variance. Some of the reasons for declining reports we touched on: a lack of visibility by mandatory reporters, children experiencing these forms of abuse may be subjected to spending more time with their abusers, causing greater fear of retaliation if they were to try and make a report. The increase of attendance at online schools we talked about. It's nothing against online schools, but it provides for opportunities where if they were in a supervised school environment, those opportunities likely wouldn't exist. One of the things that's common with child abusers is when there's evidence of abuse, even when we had brick and mortar schools being the primary focus of schools, they would keep their children out of the schools until the evidence of the assault was lessened. But at some point, that teacher would still have interaction with that student, conversations. The counselor maybe talks to them, the school nurse, the janitor, the custodian, maybe the lunch lady, whatever. Somebody's having conversations with these students in the brick and mortar schools, and they're able to maybe learn about this violence and report it. So we talked about options. Some of the things that we came up with were when I say we, Sergeant Welsh and Sergeant Slattery came up with were presenting to schools presenting to the kids at the schools. I don't know yet whether we've reached out to District 60 to try to partner with them in that regard. Sergeant Slattery talked about a semi truck that has a presentation built into that truck, talks about human trafficking and some of the issues related to that they may be able to bring down to the schools. And I think we need to explore some of those things that we can do to educate kids, especially when you talk about the online luring and enticement of children. Most of the solutions that we find are related to DHS, social services, not necessarily just DHS, but those kind of functions where they can interact with the kids and try to break that cycle. There's also, I think, an option for, if they aren't already happening, non-judicial parenting classes. Right now, I know that as part of child abuse cases, oftentimes there'll be mandated classes that the offenders will have to attend depending on the severity of the abuse. But there's also, I think, an opportunity prior to arrest for non-judicial parenting classes to educate new parents on what happens, how kids react to different things. You know, something as simple as understanding teething and how the kid's going to cry and cry and cry while they're going through that process, and knowing that ahead of time may educate people and it'll give them other resources to do besides striking out or acting out with that kid. Some other options that we've thought of are public announcements, maybe billboards, PSAs through Cox or the cable company, billboards, that kind of thing. Affordable or free after school or summer programs. I think that's an area I've heard talked about here a lot of times, is summer programs for kids. We do at the police department have the Pueblo Police Activities League, where we do a variety of different sports. Right now we do lacrosse and football. For lacrosse is boys and girls, and football. But maybe there's an opportunity to expand those programs into other areas that maybe kids that aren't into sports would like to do. And that would serve a couple of things. It would maybe remove that kid from that environment and get another set of mandatory reporters that would be able to report if there was violence going on in the home. I think that's it for my presentation. Yes, sir.
I appreciate that. You did a great job of giving us some options, which I think we need to consider all of those. Those are really interesting things that we might be doing as a city and helping. So if you can stay tuned.
Yes, sir.
You know, we'll, I have a couple of questions for you, but I'm going to have everyone make their presentations and then you can come back at the end.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to call our district attorney, Mr. Jeff Chosner. I'd like to introduce some people that you brought along that might be able to help us on some questions. If you could raise your hand when I call your name. Tony Marzavis, Assistant DA, welcome. And Ann Mayer, Juvenile Senior Deputy. Thank you for being here. Cody Lardner, Chief Juvenile Diversion, or is it Gardner? Gardner, okay. Jeff, you need to improve your printing. Welcome, Cody. Appreciate it. And last but not least, Florence Hunt, Chief Victim Advocate. You're with the Victim Activist Group. Is that a group? Or whatever. Oh, unit. Okay. Welcome, Florence. Good to see you. Thank you, District Attorney Chosner, for being here.
Thank you, Councilor Flores and council members. Good to be here with you tonight to talk this important subject. Always good to come before City Council and share information with you as necessary. And if you have other topics that we need to bring up, more than happy to come. As you know, I have invited various members of the City Council to come to my office on any occasion that we can work out that would be mutually convenient. I don't think there's anything more important than the public safety. And I think for you to come to the office and see what we do, what we have is vitally important for your jobs and to make sure we have a great team together. With regard to the term team, you have sort of the tip of the iceberg here. You have some of the most important players, whether it's child abuse, domestic violence, or crime in general here, but there's actually a much larger team that works together virtually on a daily basis, whether it's the Rape Crisis Center, whether it's the Domestic Violence Task Force, whether it's the State Patrol who deal with human trafficking, whether it's the Sheriff's Office that deals with all of this, whether it's CBI that has their own task forces in a multitude of areas, whether it's the FBI or the U.S. Attorney. I've really worked at great lengths to keeping the U.S. Attorney involved in the crime scene down here and the Attorney General. And both of those gentlemen have done a superb job working with the 10th Judicial District on keeping crime down. I also have a chiefs group that meets on a monthly basis. You're more than welcome to come to that. But once a month in my office, we get all the chiefs of all the agencies together so that at least once a month, we're coordinating with each other as to what are the most important crimes in the community. And I think that is a model for the rest of the state. Prior U.S. attorneys, Jason Dunn had me speak at a U.S. attorneys conference on how we do it in Pueblo, because they have found that to be so effective. So, you know, it's paid benefits for us. We have an embedded FBI agent in the Pueblo Police Department. And at our chiefs meeting, we have a U.S. attorney that actually comes down every month. With regard to the email that we received as to what we do, who we are, I think one of the things that would be valuable for you to do is to come and see our office. Most people don't know we have 70 people in our office. We have 27 attorneys in the office, FTEs for them. Currently, I only have 17 of those slots filled. This is a problem in our office, but it's not unique to Pueblo. It's one that's taking place throughout the state. There just aren't enough prosecutors. You're seeing that in the police force. You're seeing it in the sheriff's department. And quite frankly, to some extent, you're even seeing it in the public defender's office. And so our effectiveness to some extent is dependent on having our manpower slots filled as best we can. We operate on a $4.2 million budget. We are funded largely by the county and by the general revenue funds there, but we also have grant money too, whether it's anti-gang grant monies, whether it's violence against women, whether it's the VAWA acts, whether it's compensation for our victims. All of those monies are dedicated to the safety and protection well-being of the city of Pueblo and the county as well. The people that I brought with me tonight are the ones who are the mainstays, not only in child abuse, but all of these. So I have Mr. Tony Marzavis with me. He's been in the office for 28 years. He has done a superb job for the people of this county for that period of time. Florence Hunt has been here for an extended period of time. She's been here over 30 years. She has been recognized not only by the Colorado District Attorneys Association, but also by the Victim Advocates Council in the state as being the outstanding advocate. We have an award-winning office with people like that. I have Ann Mayer here. I brought along for any questions you folks may have because she deals specifically with child crimes, whether they're child sex abuse, whether it's just domestic violence cases. She is a specialist in that area. And then I have Cody Gardner with me, who's our diversion counselor. He runs that particular unit. It's primarily juvenile diversion, but it deals with adult diversion as well. So the kind of cases that you may be interested in tonight, these are the primary people who will be dealing with those and the ones that you would see. We look at 10 to 12,000 cases a year. That number has stayed consistent over the last 15 years. The amount of crime, so to speak, has stayed roughly the same, but the lethality of it, the seriousness of the crime has changed. When I came to office in January of 2013, about 2,500 of those 10,000 cases that we charged were felonies. Now about 3,000 of those are. So it's gone up from 25% to 30% in about 9 years. That tells you how difficult it is in the community, even though the number of cases are the same, the complexity of them, the lethality of them, the violence of them has increased over the last 9 or 10 years. You can try and put your finger on that as to why that is. There's all kinds of social concerns, economic concerns, cultural concerns that you can talk about, but it has gone up and we're the prosecutorial staff that has to deal with that and trying to keep this community safe. When they say, what is your role if the topic tonight is child abuse, our role really, quite frankly, is to prosecute the wrongdoers in the community, those who have caused the harm. You can look at your DA's office in any number of ways. One is putting people in jail. That's what the public expects us to do to get the bad guys off the street. But I prefer to look at it as defending victims. The people that I talk to on a daily basis are those people who have been harmed by crime. And the attitude that I have and the philosophy that I bring is let's try and reduce harm in this community. Let's try and make sure that people are safe in their homes at night. Let's try and make sure that they have all the resources available to them. Florence behind me handles a victim compensation fund that doles out about $300,000 a year and people to try and make them whole, whether it's to fix their car, to fix windows, in some cases provide funeral services, in other cases to take care of psychological services. We use that money to try and make those victims of crime whole again. And we're very aggressive in doing that. And Florence does a tremendous job in making sure that that gets done. Cody will take people who have been victims of child abuse or domestic abuse, and he has contacts throughout the community, whether it's Christ Life Ministries, whether it's State of Grace. You talk about the social agency that's out there. Cody is plugged into those people so that they can make sure, we can make sure that they receive the services that they are, in my view, entitled to. So we're trying to be very aggressive on that. When you're dealing with child abuse cases, we have other people here from the Child Advocacy Center that frankly take those victims right up front more than we see them, because you're dealing with people of tender years. You're trying to not re-injure them psychologically or any other way for the abuse that they've gone through. So they're really kind of on the cutting edge of that. When we have the interviews that we need, those are then sifted through law enforcement and they come to us. At that point, we'll see the quality of case they have and try and be aggressive about taking care of those kind of cases. So finally, I would just say, and then I'll open up for questions a little bit later, but in terms of the statistics that Chief Noller put before you, and I should say, Chief Noller and I talk almost on a daily basis. If not he and I talking, our senior staffs are talking to each other continually. That's true with the Sheriff's Department, with CBI and the FBI as well. It's a constant conversation on how to make Pueblo safer. And let me tell you, up until about 2019, Pueblo was getting safer. In the year 2018, crime was down across the board about 10%. In 19, it was down about 17%. In 20, COVID year, it was only down about 3.5%. So we were worried about that horseshoe in 21, and sure enough, it came back. So some of the statistics that you folks are rightly concerned about I think are in part due to COVID. It's too easy to blame everything on COVID these days, but I think it is true in part, that is part of the problem. The other part of the problem that I've been very vocal on for the last 8 months now has been the legislative bills that have come out of our state legislature. And I can go into a variety of examples of that, but some of those I've communicated with you on. With regard to editorials, I've written to the Denver Post, the Gazette, the Pueblo Chieftain. I've been on every news channel here talking about how we are backtracking in the state legislature the safety provisions for this community. And my obligation is to the citizens of this community to make sure they're safe in their homes every night. And unfortunately, I think some of those have had a deleterious effect on safety. And I will continue to talk about those as they come up in the state legislature. But I think not just COVID, but I think some of the legislative things that have happened over the course of the last 2 legislative sessions have contributed to the crime in the community, the rise in the crime rate. For instance, and the chief knows this and the sheriff knows this, 70% of our homicides, 70% of our officer involved shootings, 70% of our drive-by shootings are all committed by people out on some condition of release. If we could just keep people in jail that we put there initially, you would have 3/4 less problem today than we're currently experiencing. So I continue to advocate for tougher laws. At the same time, all of us in law enforcement are in favor of more experimental programs. For instance, the LEAD program, which I know council is well aware of, has a very low recidivism rate for those who have essentially substance abuse problems, so we can try and help that way. We have our behavioral health treatment court that my predecessor, Mr. Tebow, put into place. That's been effective in trying to reduce harm. Being a veteran myself, I advocated for the veteran treatment court. We have that. I'm in court all day Thursday in both the behavioral health and the veterans treatment court. Chief Lucero and I traveled to Nashville to see another kind of diversion program that we think we might be able to bring in whole or in part to Pueblo County to try and take care for those who have excessive mental health issues. So those, and the last one I want to mention, because I want a comprehensive, holistic approach to this, and I'm working with the judiciary on this. Judge Carnes started it, Judge Ernst has picked it up, is what do we do with post-confinement drug addiction? How do we handle that? So I have talked about, I am willing to cut people's sentences if we can keep them in a drug treatment program, because if they've served their sentence and they're out, there's nothing I can do about it. And within 2 hours to 2 days, they're back doing the same thing again. We need to have some follow-on treatment. We need to have some follow-on kind of activities that keep these people clean and living a good, productive life, not only for the community, but for themselves as well. So with that, I know I've probably gone close to my 15 minutes. That is a general approach to what we're doing. I think that's kind of encompasses the child abuse program in general terms. And I have experts here that can help us answer any questions that you might have at the end of the session. So again, it's an honor to be with you all here today. Thank you all for having me here, and I anticipate your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very informative. Next, I'd like to call Zane Grant. He's the Executive Director of CASA, which stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. Welcome, Mr. Grant.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. We appreciate that very much. We did have a PowerPoint. It's very brief that we can put out. Just to tell you a little bit more about the organization that I'm the director of, as Councilman Flores pointed out, Court Appointed Special Advocates, or CASA of Pueblo. It's a national program. There's over 900 CASA programs nationwide. We have 18 programs here in the state of Colorado, 3 of which I'm the director of. So I have an 8-county service area. We have CASA of Pueblo serves all of Pueblo County. Then we have Heart of Colorado CASA, which serves Chaffee, Custer, Fremont, and Park counties, and Arkansas Valley CASA that serves Bent, Crowley, and Otero counties here in Colorado. So our mission is to advocate for abused and neglected children by providing a voice in the courts and in the community through trained volunteer advocates. I don't think I'm out of line by saying that I'm the only representative here today that deals with family court. So the district attorney's office, obviously law enforcement, they deal in the criminal realm as well as the advocacy center. So there's two things that happens when there's a potential child abuse case. There can be charges filed against a parent. Obviously, that goes through District Attorney Chostner's office and law enforcement. But the other avenue is through social services that they can file a civil case. So the worst thing that can happen in our world is termination of parental rights. It's not a criminal situation. It is strictly civil. Now, that's not to say that the parents could have some charges filed against them for the reasons the case was involved. But in family court, really the goal is restoration of the family. So if children are removed and placed into foster care, or if they're placed with relatives, or they can stay at home and services are then mandated to occur, ordered by the court to occur in the home of the child or the children, depending on how many children there are in that family. And so our volunteers are tasked by being the eyes and the ears of the court system. So their job is to learn as much as they can about the child's situation, their school environment, if they're school age, whatever the case may be. And their job is to report that back to the court so the courts can make informed decisions about what's happening for child abuse victims. It's interesting because we work in a world where we want to be as family friendly as possible. We want to be as family strength based as possible. And obviously that clashes sometimes with law enforcement and charges or criminal activity. It's interesting, Chief Noller said the word offender. And we don't call our parents offenders. We call them parents, right? Mom and dad. We use that kind of language. But I think sometimes we go a little too far because we don't call children victims enough. And I think that's the issue here is we've got to start looking at children in these situations more in terms of victimology than just a child in a family where there's problems, because what we're seeing now as far as some of the trends is some pretty severe cases of child abuse and neglect that are occurring in our community. And they're very difficult. They're very complicated. After 25 years of working in the child welfare system, I can tell you I could be here for days, and I tried to condense to a few highlights in my 15 minutes here with you. But this is a very complicated problem. And a lot of our laws are really guided by the federal government and the federal legislature, as well as the state legislature. So I did come up with a few ideas that I'd like to present to you tonight, but just to kind of give you some more statistics here, 2021 at a glance, there were my organization served 380 children out of the 385 that were before the court. So we had 5 children that we weren't able to serve in 2021. And we did that through the work of 110 CASA volunteers. There was a question about staff size. I have a staff of 14, and 8 of those are in our Pueblo office. You can look at the graphic there. It kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what we were looking at as far as the demographics. So it tells you how many, the gender, the age range, the ethnicity, but I want to highlight the abuse types. We had 17 children involved in sexual abuse cases, 61 physical abuse, 13 involved in domestic violence cases, 111 involved in neglect cases, 75 drug exposed infants. These are children who have tested positive at birth for a controlled substance. That is up 3 times of where we were 3 years ago. In 2018, 2019, we served 25 infants, and last year we had 75. And we're on course to probably meet or beat that this year. Substance abuse cases, they're generally categorized as neglect, but because we like to track substance abuse a little bit differently, we add a substance abuse category. So that's 103 youth that were involved in a situation. I would say that as the primary reason why they were involved, but all of our cases have some element of substance abuse. It's at least 85% have some element of parental substance abuse happening in the home. If you look at the next slide, I just wanted to kind of show you the historical data, and you kind of see the graphic there. So we did take a dive in 2020 during COVID with our filings, and they shot right back up in 2021. So you kind of see there that where we're standing at the end of 2021, we almost had 400 children go before the courts. at the top there in 2019, just to kind of show you, this was pre-pandemic, we had 217 children involved in 137 cases. In 2020, we had 163 children involved in 99 cases. So we took a little dip there for reasons that have already been talked about. I think it's pretty obvious that COVID, especially with the mandatory reports declining rapidly, we saw that fall out. In 2021, again, 385 children, and those are numbers from the court, not necessarily my organization. So that's a 44% increase over 2020, if I did the math right. So you start to see how family stress, I think during COVID certainly played a role. We definitely see that families are pretty stretched thin. Some of the other concerning trends that I wanted to point out to you tonight, we have had a 60% increase in youth served just in my organization, not system-wide. I think it speaks to the growth of our organization and that we're trying to meet the need and the demand that every child that goes through the court system has a CASA volunteer there to be their voice. We did experience a 32% increase in youth served over the past 2 years as an agency. Again, the cases involving the drug exposed infants did prompt a specialty court to be developed with our federal court judge, our judicial court judge, which is William Alexander. And we piloted a program statewide that was called the Safe Baby Court. And it's just a specialty court where things are just a little more intense. We really try to help work with the families on a little more intense basis to try to alleviate some of the issues that that they were experiencing prior to their children being born testing positive. Our sexual abuse cases and our physical abuse cases both increased by 27% over the last year. I've already mentioned this, the cases do seem to be more intense, not only in the abuse, but also the duration of the case is lasting a little bit longer. And that's something that we're really trying to tune into to try to figure out what we can do. And I'm sure it's no surprise that children have fallen dramatically behind in school because of COVID, because of being out. So we're feeling those effects as well. We're seeing a lot of children that are just not able to really do well in school. They're not able to get back in the swing of things. So I know our CASA volunteers have really stepped up to try to help those outcomes. We have CASA volunteers sitting at a kitchen table helping them with homework. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, to just try to, go to IEP meetings. They're in the schools, they're talking to school counselors, they're talking to teachers. And, the themes are pretty much the same. Kids have just fallen behind. And the online schooling just didn't really do much for them in a lot of ways. I think, the parents that we're working with sometimes, they're struggling in their daily life that school for their children is not a priority. And so we're trying to pick up those pieces as best we can. On the next slide, I kind of highlighted some of the outcomes that we see as an organization that we're fairly proud of. We're trying to do our part as best we can. We've had a consistent 1% recidivism rate over the past 5 years. The state average is between 10 and 12% of cases that cycle back through the system, and we have less than a 1% recidivism rate. So the cases that we're working on and we're closing, they're not coming back necessarily to the system, at least not for the same allegation that they opened up for. We implemented a statewide outcomes project through our state organization, which is Colorado CASA. About 10 years ago, we've been working on this, and we're just starting to get some really good data on our cases. They're both subjective and objective data, but basically what we're able to show now is that we're able to reduce the amount of time that children are in foster care by about half of the national average. So typically about 9 months for children to be in foster care, and the national average is 18. In light of COVID and the remote learning, I've already discussed some of this. We did do a lot of in-home visitation. That was really difficult. It was hard for our advocates sometimes to even get into houses, particularly foster homes, because they wanted to use the excuse that COVID was keeping us from being able to visit with them. They would ask us not to come to the house, that they wanted to just do virtual visits. They would not let us into homes. Those were all very alarming to me. And I took that pretty serious. And I used a lot of force to make sure that we were able to see children face to face. I don't want to see kids on a TV screen. I don't want to walk through a house on a TV screen. We don't get the real picture. I want to know what's happening for that child. I want to know that there's food in the refrigerator. I want to know that their shoes are not full of holes. I want to know that these kids are being taken care of, and we don't get that on Zoom visits. And that was probably the biggest issue for us during COVID, was just getting in to see kids. And, like I said, we had our fights, but we were able to get past that, and we had to be creative in how we did that. I don't think it's, a surprise here. We had a fatality last year. It was an awful case. It was a terrible situation for a child. And those are the kinds of things that I think we tune into. We have to lay our eyes on children. We have to see them. And so when those barriers are put up, and understandably, we know there was a global pandemic, but those are the children that are left behind. Those are the children that suffer the most when we can't get in and see them. In the last, let's see, I kind of lost my space. I'm sorry. Ensuring that our youth are getting outside, participating in sports, music, any other extracurricular activities. Again, these are not priorities for the families that we're working with, because again, understandably, they're already dealing with so much. But if we can help them try to engage in those kinds of activities and get their children to experience life to its fullest, that's then, again, we've done our job. We've met with the YMCA. We've gotten passes for our children. They've been very gracious to us with making sure that we have enough space at the Camp Jackson for the youth that would like to attend. Those are the things that we want. We want as many people as we can to lay eyes on children. Let's see. Over the last 5 years, there's been 746 children that we've closed cases on. 57% were returned home or remained home. And I think that's very important. I think sometimes the system is seen as like a way to legally adopt children out from their parents. Sometimes we get a negative connotation in child welfare that we're here just to remove kids from their families and put them up for adoption. And nothing could be further from the truth. Like I said, 57% either returned home or remained home. Only 8% were really adopted out. 34% were placed with family or kinship. And that's if we cannot keep them at home, if their parents are unable or unwilling to make the changes to keep them safe, then we want children to be with their families, biological families. And so a lot goes into that to make sure that we can make that happen. 1% either aged out of foster care. That's the worst outcome we have for the youth that we work with. It's very hard to see a lot of our teenagers that are kind of trapped in the foster care system. They just bounce from foster home to foster home, and there's really no one there for them long-term. And so those are our more devastating, I think, situations that we work with in our organization. Other than that, that gives you an idea of the kinds of things that we've accomplished in our organization. What can be done locally? Early intervention is really key, I think, in all of this. Home visitation, like I said, laying eyes on children. Attention to education and support is going to be a critical thing in the coming years. I don't mean this tongue in cheek, or certainly not meant disrespectful at all. There's not a lot you can do for us behind the chairs or the desks that you're sitting in. We need you out in the community. We need you coming to our events. We need you learning about our programs, talking to volunteers, talking to advocates, talking to agencies that are trying to do this work. Unfortunately, some things decisions are made. We see this with the federal government, particularly, and sometimes with state government, that decisions are made that are not well informed. And sometimes those policies work against us. They work against what we're trying to do. I did have a slide in here about families first that I kind of skipped over, but essentially that was some federal legislation that philosophically is very, very well written. It's meant for more family preservation services. The problem is it leaves behind the kids that are past family pres. We've got children that need resources and need support that we can't find for them anymore because they've eliminated group homes and residential treatment centers. And so the consequences is we've got, as I understand it, a group of kids that are hanging out in Children's Hospital in Denver because there's nowhere to put them, because they require services that are well beyond what we can offer to them now through Family First and trying to be more preventative. So that's another issue that I think I want you to hear when I say, we need you to know this issue inside and out before any policy decisions are made. And of course, it would, my staff would be upset with me. They're all in a training tonight, so that's why I'm here by myself. But if I didn't ask you to, of course, support us in every way that you can, come to the events. Like I said, I know several of you already do that, and I appreciate that very much. But just know the issue. Stop by anytime at CASA. Although the work that we do is very confidential and we can't tell you very many details about specifics, we're always open to you to come and visit, to see what we do in action. And again, my gratitude to all of you for listening and for scheduling this. Thank you.
Mr. Grant, thank you very much. Great presentation. Our last presenters I'd like to introduce at this time, Jennifer Chavez. She's the Executive Director of the Pueblo Child Advocacy Center. Shelby Maldonado, she's the forensic interviewer with the Pueblo Child Advocacy Center, and Casey Ms. Lewick, family advocate with the Pueblo Child Advocacy Center. So welcome.
Now I'm on. Okay. Good evening. Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, council members, for having us here tonight. Again, my name is Jennifer Chavez. I'm the Executive Director with the Pueblo Child Advocacy Center. I will let my staff here introduce themselves.
I'm Casey Meislowick. I'm the family advocate. I've been there for a few months, over a year now.
And I'm Shelby Maldonado. I am the adult forensic interviewer with the Pueblo Child Advocacy Center. I've been there for a little over a year as well.
I'd like to share a story with you today. I'd like to tell you Robin's story. Robin is 5 years old and she's being sexually assaulted. Robin decided to tell her teacher, who had her tell her counselor, who had her tell the vice principal, who had her tell the principal. The principal then had her tell a caseworker, who had her tell the police. The police had her tell the nurse, who had to have her tell a doctor, who then had her tell a forensic nurse examiner, who then had her tell an attorney, and the attorney had her tell the court. At the end of this case, Robin had told her story at least 13 times to 13 different people. Robin asked the attorney, "Why don't adults talk to each other?" And this sat with the attorney. At this point, he realized that the system wasn't working. He realized the multiple agencies were working towards the same goal, but that they weren't working alongside of each other. This was in 1985, and this was Bud Kramer out of Huntsville, Alabama. He pulled together law enforcement, criminal justice, child protective services, medical and mental health workers into one coordinated team that revolutionized the response to child abuse. This was the birth of the multidisciplinary medical model, or excuse me, the multidisciplinary team model. At the same time, here in Pueblo, community leaders such as former District Attorney Gus Sandstrom and Kathy Redmond, who was with DHS, brought this model here to Pueblo and opened the Pueblo Child Advocacy Center, making the Pueblo Child Advocacy Center the first CAC in Colorado and the 6th in the nation. Today, we still follow that model, and we are an accredited member of the National Children's Alliance, who Bud Kramer founded in 1985. You've heard the stories, or not stories, but you've heard the stats from law enforcement and from the district attorney who are part of our model. I won't go into those details or those stats because you've already heard them. What I want to do today is let you know and let the community know what we do at the CAC and what our staff members, our team do, and what we see on a daily basis. I'm going to turn it over right now to Casey Meislowick, who is our family advocate. She's the first person typically a family will see and the child will see when they come into our center located at 301 West 13th Street. Casey?
I just want to talk to you guys a little bit about what we do in our house. I think it's really easy as people a little bit more on the outside of this process to be confused by all these different agencies that do a little bit different thing, but it kind of sounds like the same thing from the outside. Our mission is to provide prevention education and a safe environment for investigating child abuse. And like Zane Grant touched on earlier, we really do lie more on the criminal side of those charges a lot of the time. Our referrals typically come from either law enforcement, which here is the police department or the sheriff's office, or from the Department of Human Services. The majority of those are typically from law enforcement. And they'll come into our house where, like Jen said, I will greet the families, get them all settled. We look just like a house. We're not a big business. We're not a big glass building. We're not anything crazy. We have a little blue wraparound porch and we greet them in and we get them settled. There's 3 main different services that we offer to families. Anybody that's coming into our building will get advocacy no matter what other services they're receiving. And that advocacy is not only at that initial visit, but for as long as that family needs it. And that is particularly talking to caregivers about what support they need going through that process, whether they need information on the legal systems they'll be going through. Do they need information on their rights on victims' compensation? Do they need support with like their housing and utility? Do they need support with mental health services? Anything that's coming from this situation that they need to be connected with, we work with them and we listen and we really just give them a space to express what they need to express going through this process. And like I said, that advocacy goes on for as long as they need it. Some people only want like one follow-up call and then they're done and they might call back 6 months later out of the blue. Some people want to talk to us like every other week, all the time, just constantly checking in, just needing someone to listen to that story. The 2 other main services that we offer are medical exams and forensic interviews. So forensic interviews are a tool to gather as much information as possible in that investigative process. One of our trained interviewers, we have 3 in our building. We have 2 child forensic interviewers and Shelby, our adult forensic interviewer, can sit down with victims and talk them through that experience in a very trauma-informed way, in a way that's not going to make this process any worse for them. The whole goal of that forensic interview really goes back to Robin's story. It goes back to children having to repeat this over and over and over again, and trying to give them a place to come where they can tell this experience, they can talk about it, and they can get all of the information out in one place. And then we can have law enforcement, we can have Department of Human Services, we can have our district attorneys, we can have anyone who needs to see that after the fact, watch that interview instead of having to talk to a child again about that experience. We also do medical exams, like I mentioned, and all of those are what our medical staff would term non-acute medical exams, which really just means there's been some time passed since any incidents have occurred. Anything that is acute, we would refer them over to the amazing SANE department over at Parkview. We actually work with a lot of their nurses as our contract staff to do the medical exams in our house. And the reason for that is that they just have better equipment. They have much more available to them over at that hospital than we do for those acute exams. But for non-acute exams, it's a lot more fun for kids to come into a place with a beautiful mural and get to wear homemade gowns and get to have a blanket on the bed that they get to take home with them and this cool pillowcase, and come in and talk to our trained professionals that can check in on them and make sure that they're healing, make sure that their bodies are okay, make sure that they know those things. The most important part of our medical exams that our nurses talk about is being able to tell children that they're whole and that that experience didn't change them. It doesn't have to determine what they do with their future, and talking to them realistically about the impacts on their body and what has happened and who they are, because sometimes they don't have anyone else to hear those things from. Sometimes they don't have parents who are going to tell them what's normal and healthy and okay. They have people who might be lying to them. They have people who might be the ones who have done these things to them, and they have no reference for what's going on. And those are our 3 big main services, but we work with a much bigger team than our little house to do those. We only have 6 people in-house. Well, I think 5 right now. I say 6 because we just had an intern leave us recently. We have our 3 interviewers. We have me as a family advocate, Jen as our executive director. And then we are actually about to hire a new resource development person.
And a mental health provider.
So I'm here today to talk about the MDT. So our multidisciplinary team consists of the Pueblo County Sheriff's Office, Pueblo Police Department, Health Solutions, the District Attorney's Office, and then the Parkview Forensic Nurse Team, the SANE nurses. And we all come together typically twice a month. It's every other Thursday, and we meet and talk about cases. We discuss these cases in depth and how we're going to best serve the child and their family. We can meet more frequently if needed. We have a thing called emergent case reviews, or there's another word for them. It will come to me in a little bit, but where we can be requested to hold this MDT to get all of these key players to the table all at once to talk about it. So instead of mom having to call all these different places to get answers about the case, we can come together, have a game plan, and tell mom the same questions. We're really there to think of the holistic approach of the family, see what's going on with the kid and that family. My specialty with the adults, so I don't interview the kids, but I interview adult victims. And something that we're doing that we're all really passionate about is expanding these services to the adults, because we know that the adults are also being victimized in these homes that child abuse is occurring in. There's a national stat that says that in houses where there's domestic violence, kids are 3 times as likely to also be child abuse victims. So it's focusing on the kids, but also focusing on that multi-generational approach, what's happening in the houses. One thing that we have become really, really passionate about in this last year is increasing our outreach and figuring out a way of how to give mandatory reporting outreach to non-mandatory reporting people. So anybody that has FaceTime with kids, giving them that education, teaching them the warning signs, teaching them the risk factors, really giving them that education on how to make a good report. Because really it comes down to what is needed to make those reports to law enforcement and to DHS for these cases to get investigated, for these cases to meet the criteria that is needed. So we've spent a lot of time building up our outreach program and working with our multidisciplinary team on what they're seeing in order to better teach the community of what we can all be doing to help these kids and these families.
And that right there is, thank you, Casey. That right there is our contribution and what we are doing to help eradicate child abuse in our community. You know, listening to District Attorney Chostner, I think he hit the nail on the head there, where our laws need to change, and that needs to come from even the state and the national level. That really right there will tremendously help our community and help the children in our community. I'm sure you'll have some questions for us, and we are very happy to answer those questions, but thank you again for your time.
I think I'll have you sit there, and I think I will ask the counselors here on the dais as to any questions you have specifically for the Child Advocacy Center. Are there any questions? Counselor Martinez.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for the 3 of you coming and sharing this the story and how these how this process works and the wraparound services that you're really pushing, because it's like you're saying, it's a holistic approach. It's not just one issue of child abuse, it's underlying issues of family things, stressors, things like that. My question is, are there enough of these services, support services that these families need? Are they available enough for these families?
I guess I'll take that one because I have referrals for families. And I would say really, no, there isn't. I think we're limited on like therapy resources for people, limited on like legal support for them. We're limited on housing support for them. I feel like I'm constantly getting calls from people, and I've sent them to every resource that I can think of, and it's still just, you don't quite meet the bar for those services. Require you to be in a certain level of need for that service. And if they are just above that bar, there's no support for them anymore. And so there's definitely a lack of a lot of different things that I think these families need.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. And I feel like, so you all touched on it, Zane touched on it a little bit, PD touched on it, and it sounds like it's not just the Child Advocacy Center's role to prevent child abuse. It's not CASA's role. You know, it takes a village, it takes a pueblo to really, no matter if you're a mandatory reporter or not, if you are in close contact with a kid, a young person, it's your job to really report and you know, report it. So what are 3 tips? What are some tips on successful mandatory reporting or, you know, as someone who's not a mandatory reporter, what can tangibly I do right now with the young people in my life to look out for that? And what does that look like?
I'll start first. I think the most important thing, and this goes what we touch on when we go out into the community for the prevention, is you know, a lot of times people, they want to look the other way, you know, not in my house, or I don't want to get involved because I don't want to get involved with the police. I don't want to get involved with DHS. That's the problem right there, is people don't want to get involved, whether it's the fear or the stigma. So we're trying to beat that. We're trying to educate people and let them know that it's okay to be wrong. And in fact, we want them to be wrong, that there was not child abuse happening, but to make that report. One of the things that we touch on in our presentation is actually making the call to the 1-800 number and walking them through that. And just letting them know, you know, just what information is needed. That's the first thing. The second thing is, again, letting the child know that it's not their fault. You know, you asked Councilman Martinez is, you know, if someone comes to you, our first reaction is, oh no, that didn't happen. Or, you know, don't lie. I mean, that's truly what happens. We can't do that. You know, we have to listen to the child and we have to let them know that they were strong, they were brave for coming to you and telling them their story. And then reporting that to the appropriate people. The third one is, you know, who do they report it to? I mentioned the reporting line. And, you know, a lot of people don't know what I'm talking about, and that's DHS's child abuse hotline. I say it's 800 because it goes to the state and then it filters down into the different communities. And the girls here will give you that phone number here pretty quick. But that's right there. That's the most. Those are the 3 tips that I would say. You know, don't be afraid to report. Let the child know that it's okay, that, you know, that they're strong and that you're going to listen to them, and that there's a community, there's a village who want to help them, who really do want to listen and make sure that they're safe.
What's the hotline number?
It's 1-800 Colorado 4Kids. It's CO 4Kids. So it's super easy to remember. You just push it on your phone. And like Jen mentioned, that comes down to local communities. We used to have a direct line here in Pueblo, but they recently changed it. So calling that state hotline is really the best thing. And also reporting to law enforcement as well. If you have concerns that might rise to that level, making sure that everyone is involved from the start can be super important. A big part of what Shelby talked about, what we do is working with that MDT and making sure everyone's involved. But if we can get that from the very beginning, from people saying to both of these agencies that this is happening, that can be super helpful. And just that you don't have to have all the information, right? You don't have to have every single detail about that kiddo or their situation or their family. If you have a concern, we'd rather you report. There's no consequence for reporting in good faith. It's really just about making sure that you're doing whatever you can for kiddos, and you never know when that little bit of information you have is what's going to tip the scales to a full-on investigation.
For this group? Councilor Winter? Councilor Maestri.
I'd just like to thank you ladies for your service. Appreciate it.
All right, well, we'll like to call Zane Grant back. Before you go to, I wanted to encourage you to, write down what you think are the weaknesses in our laws, both federal and state, and what you would like to see, because you mentioned that in general, but sometimes we get to have audiences with our state legislatures here in Colorado, and sometimes with our delegates in Washington. So we would like to pass that information on. Thank you. We have Mr. Grant back, and are there any questions that anyone has? Councilor Meister.
Your statistics looked higher than the police department. Is that because the police department's only reporting city and you're reporting county-wide, county and city?
So the statistics I gave you are specific to Pueblo County, so, and it is countywide. And again, it depends on how they're looking at that. So they're taking criminal numbers and criminal related calls or violations of law calls. We're taking family courts laws, which are civil. And so they're going to look a little different. So every case that we see doesn't necessarily have any law enforcement involvement at all. Sometimes it could be a referral to the Department of Human Services. They go out and do an investigation and they feel like there's enough to open a family court case. And then the court opens that case. And so our statistics are going to be different just because they're specific to family court.
Okay, thank you. for the
Sure.
clarification.
Good question. It's a good question. Thank you.
Mr. Grant, you said that you were in need of volunteers. Can you describe to us, folks watching at home, what exactly that entails and how someone would go about volunteering for CASA?
Thank you for that question. So we provide our services primarily through our volunteers. They're everyday individuals in our community. They do not need to have any type of college degree or advanced education. We train our volunteers to know what we need them to know while they work in family court. They do have to be over the age of 21. CASA is a mandated program in the Colorado Children's Code. So we have certain laws that are written into the statute that we have to follow. Volunteers go through a 37-hour pre-training as well as a series of background checks, obviously, and to make sure that this is a good fit for the volunteer experience that they would like to have. Once they're trained, they're sworn in by a judge and they do become an officer of the court. And after that, then they're assigned to their first case. And their job is, again, to gather as much information for the court as possible. So they are going to family homes, they're going to foster homes if the children are in foster care, they're going to schools, they're meeting with medical providers with the ultimate goal of gathering as much information as they can. Along the way, obviously, there's a lot of mentor opportunities through that because they're getting to know their children that they're working with. We ask our volunteers to see the children face-to-face a minimum of twice a month. So they are meeting with parents, they are meeting with families and or whoever might have custody or temporary custody of the children at the time. And their job is to stay involved in that case up until it concludes. So we do ask for a 12 to 18 month commitment up front. Most of our volunteers tell us that they work between 2 to 4 to 6 hours a week on their case. Obviously, every case is different. There's no cookie cutter answers in child welfare. So we can't predict exactly how much time they might need, but we try to tailor a case based on if they're working full time. We try to tailor a case maybe with fewer children in the home or one child, or maybe an allegation that we don't anticipate to be as intense as other issues that volunteers that have more time can contribute. But you know, it's hard to recruit volunteers for our program, even though we have so many, because we have some amazing people in our community, but it's a very difficult volunteer experience. But at the same time, what we hear back from our volunteers is the most important thing that they've ever done.
Mr. Grant, 1% recidivism rate is very impressive. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Why do you think it's so low?
Well, I think when you give families resources, and I think when you're in their life to the degree that our volunteers are in their life, and there's a lot of things that happen during that case. And sometimes the CASA volunteers aren't only meeting with children, they're coaching parents, you know, just by being there and letting them know that somebody cares about their family and that they can, if they just seek out the resources that are available and they implement what's being taught in their classes and in their treatment plan, then we're able to kind of avoid them coming back. A lot of the cases they don't go back. Sometimes they do end up with their relatives long term. And so again, we're there to support the relatives through the process as well and try to help them navigate a very complicated system, very bureaucratic and lots of red tape for a lot of our families. So I think that's kind of where we feel like we shine is really helping families fix whatever the issue is and then move on and not come back to the attention of either the Department of Human Services or the courts.
Well, I think that that's great. And I think that speaks to how much the volunteers and your staff cares about the kids that you serve. So congratulations. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the Safe Baby Court process and what that, like what specifically they do.
Well, the first thing is they go to court a lot more often than the regular dependency and neglect cases that we work with. There's a bigger team. There's more involvement with that family to try to make sure that they're doing what they need to do. There's also a lot of praise and some incentives in that program that are different from our regular cases. And again, I think just specializing on the population, it's usually younger parents. Oftentimes it's their first child that they've had. And again, just educating parents specifically to the issue of how their parental substance abuse directly impacts their child is critical. And I don't work in that arena. I obviously have staff that are very much more versed than I am on the ins and outs of Safe Baby Court. But I think what's nice is, again, we've really made it a focus as a team to go in. I think it's a resource issue to try to handle every case the same way we do in a specialty court, just because, you know, of time and commitments and again, numbers. But I think with the specialty courts, it gives us an opportunity to make sure a family would be a good, you know, they have to agree to participate in that. And so there's certain expectations that we have of them before we'll accept them into the Safe Baby Court case. And they have to make certain agreements, and then we hold them, you know, to those agreements. And I think the model just seems to be working really well, but it's a very intense model, and it tends to burn out people, you know, rather quickly, but it's working, and we're certainly committed to continue.
Councilor Meister, did you have?
Just to follow up on Councilor Graham's, I think I missed the where to sign up, but how to sign up.
I don't think I gave that, but thank you. So our website is casapueblo.org, and we do have a volunteer tab on our website that explains the process. You can call our offices at 583-6326, and we're happy to talk to anybody who might have any interest in becoming a CASA volunteer.
Councilor Meister.
Okay, so we're talking about state laws and that have come across the table. Do you, and I was going to ask the DA this, are they directly related to reducing charges when it comes to like abuse and sentencing, or are they directly, or are they more related to like reducing them according to substance abuse? Because we've done a lot of that. We've decriminalized a lot there, you know, so that the user, the addict, doesn't suffer. But are we seeing a fallout of where the children who are the children of the addicts, they're still continuing to suffer because their parent is still undergoing addiction, and there's the consequences are lacking there? Is there like a correlation there, or how, when we talk about the reduction in law, what is it that we're speaking of?
Would you like to come down, Jeff, and maybe attempt?
I can let District Attorney Chostner answer that question, certainly on the criminal and the legal side of things. I think for us, it's always been an issue. Substance abuse has always played a role in child welfare in one way or another. And obviously treatment is critical. But the most critical thing we have is the buy-in from the person who's struggling with the addiction. You know, they have to want to change. They have to want to have something different in their life. And so oftentimes the child is the reason that they should make those changes. And we just hope we can convince them enough to make those kinds of changes and to choose their children over the substance. But again, you know, the science of addiction is also very complicated, and we have parents that aren't always able to make it. They're not always able to make the changes that are going to keep children safe. And I should say, in our world, I shouldn't say this, but in our world, marijuana is not the problem. What we're seeing as the problem is cocaine, meth. Prescription drug abuse is rampant with opiates. And so those are the drugs that really make parents unavailable to the children that we're working with. You know, parents they're using marijuana. It's not ideal. Please don't take that wrong. But they just lack a lot of motivation as a result of their marijuana use. It's the harder drugs that we see as a bigger risk to the children that we're working with.
So your rate, your count on, what was it? Children, you had substance abuse, but you had the one above it.
And that was the
Which-
drug exposed infants,
Drug exposed infants. And so they were born with. Okay.
born testing positive for a controlled substance. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take over. Thank you.
Excuse me, Daryl, can you tell me if we're connected with Counselor Winter?
I'm here.
Oh, are you? Do you have, do you have any questions at this point?
I don't, Dennis. Thanks for checking in.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Councilor Flores. I've asked Mr. Marzavas and Ms. Mayor to come up here specifically because of the questions that Ms. Maestri has asked for. In a general sense, I think there is a connection between criminality and child neglect. I don't have statistics in my office, and I've not seen any generated by the police department that show a correlation, a statistical correlation between a parent being put in jail and the subsequent administrative action with a child. But I also think it's true, and I think Ann can answer some of this, that if she's looking at a child who has been neglected, sexually abused, that when you look at their parent, more often than not, one or both of those are going to be involved in the criminal justice system. With regard to the reduction in the sanctions for crime, I've asked Mr. Marzavas to come for that. I can tell you in general terms, when we testified in front of the legislature, when the Colorado District Attorney's Council has testified on a variety of issues, the ones that we've been concerned about are in general turning felonies into misdemeanors and reclassifying misdemeanors into tickets or petty offenses. That I think, I don't think those two issues in terms of the effect on children and the increase in crime is necessarily a good one-on-one kind of correlation. But I do think that there is an effect there. What I do think that there's a direct line on is reducing the sanctions of crime and your crime rate going up. I think that's absolutely true. So if you would indulge us just for a moment, I'm going to ask Mr. Marzavas to talk about the specifics, keeping in mind that we have limited time here, but to talk a little bit more specifically about that reclassification of crime, I'm going to ask Ms. Mayor if she would talk a little bit about child abuse cases, how those may relate to the parents that they come from. Tony?
Because you mentioned something about substance abuse, let me start first with one of the legislative actions that came down with respect to the possession or use of controlled substances. In my career, I've seen that decriminalized. Unlawful use used to be a class 5 felony. It then became a misdemeanor. And now possession of any scheduled 1, 2, 3 controlled substance, which includes heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, a possession less than 2 grams is a misdemeanor offense. And it's a drug misdemeanor. So right now you're looking at no more than 364 days in jail maximum on that particular charge. Furthermore, the last legislative session, the misdemeanors have been reclassified yet again. In Colorado, you used to have 3 levels of misdemeanors, class 1, class 2, and class 3. Effective March 1st of this year, there are now only 2 classes of misdemeanors, a class 1, which is punishable by no more than 364 days in jail, or a class 2 misdemeanor, which is punishable by no more than 120. And so a class 3 is gone. And we used to have 2 levels of petty offenses. We now only have 1. And things have been classified again down to what we call civil infractions. To that end, when the punitive consequence is less, certainly if somebody is looking at a misdemeanor, I mean, there's not perhaps the same incentive to take advantage of treatment programs if they're charged. If you say, look, I'm putting you on probation, I want to put you out there for 2 years. Well, what if I just do a jail sentence? And then don't take advantage of some of the rehabilitative programs that either probation or the community has to offer. So sometimes we do see that knock-on effect and that it's not, in fact, that's partially what happened, I think, with respect to, despite how effective lead is with it, if somebody's looking at going, not being able to be arrested now for an unlawful possession of a drug, or they're only going to get a misdemeanor, they're like, well, why do I want to be handed off now to some caseworker to assist me? I'll just accept my misdemeanor consequence.
So the reclassifying these down actually contradicts and runs interference with rehabilitative efforts, which seems to be the general philosophy, but this dumbing down of laws is hurting the rehabilitative effect for those who need it the most. And if I could say one thing here too, we are law enforcers. We are not lawmakers. We're as good as the tools that the legislature gives us. So whether I agree or disagree with the law, I'm there to enforce it. But again, the last couple sessions, I will say that the tools the legislature has given us, I think, are inadequate.
Well, it sounds like a great opportunity for diversion as opposed to what's currently happening now, right? What about, we go into diversion?
We do have, I can, and that's why I have Mr. Gardner here. We have a very good diversion program here. We usually have, and I can bring him up to talk about it too, although before we do that, I would like Ms. Meyer to answer the other question. But I have Mr. Gardner here. We have about 140 to 150 people on diversion through our office right now. Our recidivism rate is very low. And it's one of the best programs in the state. And we can demonstrate that statistically with what we do. We have Councilor Martinez, with regard to diversion, I have put emphasis on expanding that program because while a low recidivism rate is nice to have, I'm more interested about what kids are we turning around, not a number. And so we have opened our program up and we've still maintained a relatively small recidivism rate. Same with our LEAD program and same with our behavioral health and same with veteran treatment court. It's not 1%, as Mr. Grant says, but it is roughly half of what our normal clientele is that goes through the traditional criminal justice system. So those programs are working. The problem with them, when you folks are asking, how can you help? The problem with them is they're resource intensive. For instance, I'm in behavioral health court all day Thursday. We'll take a look at upwards of 60 clients. Mr. Marzavas and Ms. Mayer in court under the normal docket, they'll be looking at 120 people to 150 people in the same time period. So when you have a judge dedicated, a defense counsel, a psychologist, a sociologist, in terms of the Veterans Court, a VA representative, and a prosecutor there for a limited number of people, you get good results, but the system can't bear that kind of cost for all the people there. So we'd appreciate whatever resources you folks would consider to help us with that. If Ms. Meyer, if you would please talk about what you're seeing with regard to our child victim parents.
So one of my specialties in prosecution is child fatalities. It's hard to make generalizations about that group because luckily we don't have a lot of those cases. However, when you look at serious child abuse cases, whether those be misdemeanors or felonies, most child abuse cases are misdemeanors, but a lot of what we're looking at are adults with a substance abuse or an alcohol problem, especially when we're talking about the kind of dirty homes, neglect cases, where we're talking about kids that just aren't getting that parental input or are in environments that are just not appropriate. You know, it's just not appropriate for a child to be in a home that doesn't have food or doesn't have an adult watching them, so that we have little guys being found by the police in the street in a diaper. So when we're talking about a case like that, I can't even think of one that doesn't have substance abuse among the parents. And that is, you know, it's a community-wide problem that we see, but certainly those are two things that co-occur at a very, very high rate. It also is co-occurring with mental health issues, developmental delays among the parents, and to some respect, the child victims. So it is a systemic problem. And it also is parents who are parenting by themselves typically. So I don't see that in multi-generational households. It tends to be parents that have a substance abuse problem and are living alone with their children. And so there's no fallback for when the parent or parents are using and are out of commission to be a resource for that child.
And I just wanted to add something on top of that. Because I think you also may have been thinking with the reduction in these, the misdemeanor classifications, does that make children more vulnerable? In other words, I mean, if they can get away from having rehabilitation and it's a combination of child abuse and a drug user, a family member, does the reduction in these sentencing laws actually make children more unsafe?
Again, I don't think we have statistical information on that, but I think it's a valid observation that should be looked into. Because if the parents are not being forced into treatment, then what's the effect on their kids? So I think that's a valid observation. So, and if
Sounds like a great option for diversion, right?
yes, it is. And like I say, we're using that. In fact, I'm going to have Mr. Gardner come up here. And if he's, Cody, if you come up. And he can talk a little bit about our diversion program and how we use it. I would add with regard to diversion, this last year, we went back to the commissioners and asked for an uptick in funding for that to assist with other tangential or accessory kind of needs. For instance, if you have kids who need shoes, a backpack, make sure they're in school, that kind of thing. So we've expanded the reach of our diversion program without trying to interfere with other social agencies. So Cody, would you mind giving a quick on diversion?
Time check here, and I do still have 8 minutes. I had till 7:10, so I have 8 minutes. So
I could just give you a quick brief on that. I could go into talking about our diversion program at length for hours, and I'd be happy to do so at any other time. Just kind of in a nutshell, our diversion program, we do work with first-time offenders, both juveniles and adults. In regards to substance abuse, we do have the LEAD program. They will be dealing with the more severe substance abuse issues, opioids, those type of issues. We don't necessarily work with those individuals, but we do work with the individuals, any other type of offense from misdemeanors, petty offenses up to felonies. Again, we do work with first-time offenders, making sure that they're appropriate for the program. They screen to the program. We meet with the individuals. We find out what needs are out there, what they, basically it's offense specific. If they come in on a theft charge, we're going to look into what caused that theft, what resources we can put them in place with to hopefully stop them from continuing to commit those crimes. So again, I could speak at length for a long time about what diversion is. And I would be happy to do so. But our diversion program is very effective. It is a voluntary program. We cannot force these individuals to do that. We offer them the program. If they choose to take it, they come onto our program. We run them through the program requirements. If they complete it, charges will not be filed against them in court. If they fail our program, then the case will proceed in the normal court process where the attorney would charge it. They go through the court process. We do get cases as well that have already post-file. They can be referred to diversion. If they successfully complete our program, the case is dismissed. So we have both pre-file and post-file diversion. And the goal is to get them to not reoffend, not to recidivate, and obviously save the county taxpayers money for not having people go through the court system.
thank you.
Particularly with juveniles, if I could add here, I have a certain sensitivity with juvenile cases. With adults, I don't mind being known as a tough-nosed prosecutor, and those folks need to go to jail. With kids, though, I often think, thank God there was no computers when I was a kid. Because somebody offends when they're 15 years of age now, it is never forgotten. And so when they're asking for that job, or they're trying to get hired by the state or the federal government or somebody else 20 years down the road, it comes back to haunt them. So I have a pretty good tolerance for what I call youthful indiscretion. Kids can make a mistake, and I think avoid the criminal justice system as much as possible. Talking about a second offender or third offender, then we got a different issue on our hand. But for some young person who makes a mistake, I do not want to make them part of the criminal justice system if we can avoid that.
Thank you very much. I didn't know if Ms. Hunt wanted to add anything. No. Well, thank you for being here.
I have one last question. From the 4.2 annual budget that you have, do you plan, after even being low in employees, do you plan on putting any of those resources, substantial resources, towards some of these social services that these folks are saying that actually work?
You know, that would actually be a decision for the commissioners, because I don't keep that salary savings. It goes back to the county. So what they do with that salary savings would be up to them. Sure, there's a lot of things that we're able to talk to the commissioners on a wide variety of things. And again, Ms. Hunt has a lot of recommendations in those areas because she sees a lot of the damages that's done. So.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Or we could just ask these folks right here who work with the folks. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Could I,
Sure.
2 minutes or less. First of all, you had asked about ways you can help us. One of the things Florence mentioned to me before we came in is a Spanish speaking counselor. Not necessarily in the DA's office, but with the CAC, with the Domestic Violence Task Force. If we could get a Spanish speaking counselor and fund that, I think that would be of assistance. I also want to compliment Jen Chavis on the multidisciplinary team. That really helps us refine cases without doing harm to the child involved. And they are pros at it. They do a great job and help us get the wrongdoer to trial. In terms of other services that are available, to Councilman Martinez's comment, may want to work with Legal Services of Colorado and Gail Radosevich. Many of you know Ms. Radosevich. She deals with that and pro bono services. There's a lot of attorneys in town that are more than willing to help out, but Gail would be a good point of contact for that. And then finally, again, to Councilman Martinez's point, this is a multifaceted problem, whether you're talking about culture, whether you're talking about economics. So much of crime is born out of poverty. And then the lack of social structure, the family breakdown that we've seen over the course of the last 50 years. There's so much of this that goes into it. And simply fighting crime through jail sentences is not sufficient. There's too many people out there that are falling off the social ladder to handle it that way. You've got to be more creative. Hence our buy-in to experimental programs, whether it's LEAD, behavioral health, vet court, the mental health court that Chief Lucero has talked about. We're looking at all of those, and we're looking at it with this entire team here. And I would just say, hopefully, if you saw nothing else tonight, you saw a team, and everybody is working together and working overtime to try and make Pueblo a better and a safer place. So we appreciate the opportunity to be with you, and we look forward to coming back again.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Chief Nolan, Noller, did you have something to say? Counselor?
Right now, we do not have one that assists with crime victims. And that is, I would love to have four. But at least we have one that's really great, and she decided to retire. I wanted to go and pull her out of retirement, tell her to get, because she's very good.
I appreciate it.
For a victim, even with children that are only Spanish speaking, who have
we heard you loud and clear. I think that's so important. And so maybe there'll be a place to discuss this separately. I'm looking forward to that. Chief Nolan, can I have 5 more minutes? Thank you. No, this is it. I'm at the end of my time here, but I was really intrigued by the suggestions that Sergeant or Captain Anderson and the other gentleman. And all I wanted to say really isn't a question, but I really wanted them to look at those suggestions that they had. And maybe we as a city council could look at those seriously because there's some really great suggestions there that we shouldn't just have on paper. And if you could go bring this, can you bring the slide back up for their presentation? That's the last one. Yeah, if you could just kind of touch on those briefly and because it sounds like there's maybe resources tied into a lot of the stuff that you're suggesting. And but not that we need to do this evening, but think about how maybe we can do a couple of these because it's going to take additional funds to do this. But I think they're important enough. If you could just kind of give us your thought process about these suggestions.
Sergeant Slattery with the Special Victims Unit. I think the biggest and probably the biggest bang for our buck would be getting into the schools. Just trying to talk to kids and explain why they shouldn't be sending, certain photos out to their friends, body safety, what abuse is, what resources are out there that they could actually go to would be huge. And if we could get the parents to go to some of these, that would be very important as well.
Anyone else have any questions?
I just have one, Dennis.
Oh, please, Councilor Winter.
Yeah, I just had one question. As far as these mass shootings, as you know, there are some websites that some of these people follow, and they're actually, you can actually watch the live video of the mass shootings. And you had mentioned that you have somebody that works on Facebook or social media, kind of luring children in for sexual activity. Do you have anybody on the force that's monitoring those websites like Discord or Twitch that a lot of these mass shooters are into?
Not specifically for the mass shooting, but those same applications that they use that you mentioned are used for sexting and trying to arrange for sexual encounters with children. So we do have somebody watching it, not specifically for the shootings.
So just so you're aware, there's federal law that dictates that any internet service provider, so Google, Microsoft, Twitch, Discord, if they come across any sexual exploitative material during their business, they're required by law to report it to NECMEC, which then reports it to ICAC, and that's how we get those sort of things. So there's already laws on the books federally that make them report to us, and that's how a lot of those ICAC cases start out.
Thank you.
Everyone tonight, and I appreciate being given this opportunity. Did you have a question?
So the special victims unit is only geared towards child abuse? Or is it all victims?
We deal with child abuse, domestic violence, restraining order violations, and at-risk adults, or I'm sorry, at-risk populations, adults and children.
Thank you.
Pueblo and the City Council, I want to thank all of the presenters this evening and also indicate how much we appreciate your services to the citizens of Pueblo, especially to our vulnerable children. I thank you for, making these reports. I think it's a very valuable lesson for the city, and you gave us a lot of great ideas. Also, I've learned a lot about how the whole system operates, and thank you again for agreeing to meet tonight. Thank you. I will now turn it over to our chairman.
Thanks, Councilwoman Flores, for that idea and for all of the presentations tonight. I want to echo, I learned a lot as well. So thanks, Councilman Flores, for spearheading that. So our next agenda item is going to be around the city development as a staff update. And I think that that's going to be led by the mayor. And Marissa's online. So
Marissa Pacheco's here. We've got a PowerPoint presentation, and I want to thank our guests as well for that presentation and for the discussion of that issue. Hopefully, the presentation we're going to have now is much more uplifting and hopeful for the community. But I wanted to talk with you and make sure that you're familiar with the circumstances in Pueblo. On your agenda for the 13th of June, you'll see some ordinances there that the net result of which will be we're recommending that 5 additional positions be added to the city of Pueblo. And this is the reason why. You know, we wanted to talk about Pueblo's future. 2021 housing study showed that we're going to be 9,400 housing units short in the next 10 years in Pueblo County. In the last 10 years, about 60% of the houses that have been built in Pueblo County have been built in Pueblo West. For obvious reasons, that's going to change. Pueblo West doesn't have any water. In March of 2022, March of this year, there were twice as many new building permits in the city of Pueblo as there were in Pueblo West. In April of this year, there were 3 times as many new building permits in the city of Pueblo as in Pueblo West. We think that that trend is going to continue. There are a historic number of developments being planned in the city of Pueblo. These numbers are astonishing, really. Since September of 2021, subdivision applications for 1,671 lots have been submitted to the city's planning office and public works department. That exceeds the number of lots and subdivisions for the last 10 years. So in the less than 10 months, we've got more applications for lots than we have in the last 10 years. So that's, you know, a trend that you're going to see, I think, and we need to be prepared for that, which is why we're making this presentation to you tonight and why we're recommending that we bring some additional people on. This growth is occurring in all parts of town. I'm not going to read this list for you, but this gives you an idea. These are the platted lots, 379 acres, 626 lots or units. These are lots that need to be reviewed and processed through the city's planning and public works department. Unplatted lots, there are 1,181 acres, 2,985 lots or units. In the Northeast, you'll see there's, these are the units that are being planned in the Northeast. Villa Bella, you've heard about, North Vista Highlands, Fountain Creek Apartments, Belmont Place, Oakshire Lane Cottages. On the Northwest, 101 acres on the northwest side of the city. Andiamo Development, you remember a couple of months ago, you had a presentation from them. There's an additional apartment complex of 16 acres, 280 units. The west side of town, the 233 acres, 1,573 lots or units. Cottages at Park West, the Pueblo Springs Apartments, 13 acres, 265 units. That's obviously just the first phase of, I'm sorry, yeah, that's the total phase of Pueblo Springs Apartments. Pikes Peak Park, the 90 acres, 114 lots and 220 units. That's the first phase of that development. You'll recall they're, I think, planning for nearly 600 housing units in that Pikes Peak unit. Quail Ridge and Chamberlain's West Addition, 30 acres, 180 units. Downtown, 16 acres, 421 units downtown, fuel and iron. You know, that's underway. Water Tower Place, Arkansas Bluffs, 2 acres, 115 units. You're going to see some ordinances on your agenda for your June 13th meeting on first reading to transfer property and trade property so that the developers of that parcel can put their property together. We went out for an RFP, you'll recall, to sell a couple of lots that the city had. And we ended up making a sale, or we recommend we make a sale, and we're getting some property traded to us in exchange. So you'll get all the details on that, but that's moving forward. The city block, which is, they call it city block. It's really where Cleaver Carpet Center was. That block that the Arts Alliance building is on. All of that block, except the Arts Alliance, has been purchased by out-of-town developers, and they have plans to put in initially 30 units and then an additional 178 units of market rate apartments down there on that. They're moving forward with that. South, 18 acres, motel conversion, Pueblo Dog Track redevelopment. Oops, let me go back here. So why is this important that we have adequate staff to deal with this? To developers, time is money, and delaying a project just results in exorbitant price increases. What we have to do, if we're going to review these developments timely and move them along in a timely fashion, is we've got to have a well-trained staff with subject matter expertise. This shows you the areas where they need to have knowledge in: the municipal code, land use, transportation engineering, drainage engineering, federal requirements, city construction standards. And they have to have the soft skills to deal with members of the public and to deal with developers as they go through this process. So what we're proposing is, and you'll see this, as I say, on your June 13th agenda, 5 new positions we're asking the city council to add: a planning and development, planning and community development office, 1 land use technician, stormwater, 1 additional civil engineer for drainage, in the public works department, 3 new positions, and the conversion of 1 position. So we're asking to add a deputy director of public works, a civil engineer in transportation, an associate engineer 1, a pavement management tech is going to be changed to an associate field engineer in the public works department. We expect that the annual cost of this will be about $500,000, $571,000. And they'll be funded from the general fund or from the stormwater enterprise, depending on which department they're working in. And we anticipate that the earliest we could bring any of these positions on, if they're authorized by the council, would be August of 2022. So we wouldn't bring anybody on till August. So obviously it wouldn't cost us $571,000 for the balance of this year. If the positions are authorized, they would be included in the budget for next year. So in addition to these private developments, Public Works has to spend a lot of time on public developments. And all those private developments require public infrastructure that has to be reviewed, designed, inspected by the staff at the Public Works Department. In addition, they're working on the street repairs. We're trying to really increase our capacity to do that in 2022. Our plan is to spend $10 million on street repairing our streets. So handicap corners, all of those projects require time from the Public Works Department. And to the extent they have to spend time on this, they can't spend time reviewing the development plans that are being proposed, or to the extent that they're reviewing development plans, they can't spend time on these public works improvements that need to happen. So, and you know that we're right in the process of planning and making plans for the construction of 4 new fire stations. Those will be big projects. It'll take a lot of people, a lot of time to work on those projects. So in conclusion, you know, Pueblo's been waiting a long time for this kind of growth and this kind of activity that we're finally seeing here. We need to take advantage of this opportunity, I think. We have to be prepared to timely and thoroughly review these development projects that are brought to us. And I think we just need to continue to work hard to make it easier to do business in the city of Pueblo, and adding these additional positions will allow us to do that. Present online is Marissa Pacheco. She can give you details about these specific positions. Andrew Hayes is also here, and he can give you details about any particular position if you want that information tonight. Obviously, when this ordinance comes before you, there's a thorough background paper that's been prepared that'll be presented to you that describes the job duties of each of these positions. And there will be a public hearing, obviously, where Marissa and Andrew will be available to answer any questions you have. But I wanted to prepare you for this, let you know what's coming. And these are the reasons why, is that we think that Pueblo finally is going to experience some of that growth that the rest of Colorado's had for the last 30 years. And people are showing an interest in Pueblo now, and we have to be prepared for it. We can't just let the developers come in and do whatever they want to and take their word for that they did it right. It has to be checked, but we have to have people to do that. And so that's why we want to ramp up and be prepared for this when it comes in. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and I think Marissa or Andrew would be happy to answer any questions as well.
Thanks, Mayor, for that exciting update. Councilor Winter, I saw you unmute briefly. Do you have a question or a comment?
I guess I have a question for Marissa. Is it possible to say, eliminate some of those jobs that we have on our budget that haven't been filled for years and years and years, and use those dollars for these new positions?
I would say that it's certainly possible, although I think that our number of unfunded positions have dwindled to a pretty small number at this point. And most of our funded positions we're in the process of filling. So I don't know how much, leeway there is there to use those existing FTEs.
Mm-hmm. I know that the mayor had sent out an email saying that we needed an additional $500,000 for fixing that area along the spillway on the Arkansas, where a lot of actually families have died. And he had said in the email that it wasn't in our budget. I think that's extremely important that we get that fixed. I mean, we still don't even have a sign over there, I don't think, that's in Spanish. And a lot of those folks that have died are immigrants.
I think
Can you hear-
council, yeah, we got you, Councilwoman Winter. I think you're talking about the Lowhead Dam.
It's the spillway on the Arkansas. We had a discussion about it, I guess, in 2020, because I think we had three deaths, like a father and a son and another child. I mean, I can't be really specific right now because I'd have to review it. But the Pueblo Board of Waterworks said that they were going to be applying for grants or for some funds to get that fixed. And we had told them at that time that we would try to match any kind of grants that they have to finally get this fixed. And they needed additional $500,000. I think we could probably shift some money around and take some of those.
For the benefit of those counselors that I haven't been able to talk to about this, Board of
Well, it was
Waterworks.
on, you sent an email.
Okay, the Board of Waterworks is wanting to proceed with this project. In 2020, the city of Pueblo, the Conservancy District and Pueblo County committed $327,000 each to matching grant funds to enable that Lowhead Dam to be reconstructed. The estimated cost of that project is about $9 million. Board of Waterworks was not granted that grant. They've made a request for congressionally directed spending of our senator's office. As you know, our congresswoman has decided not to participate in that program, but they've made a request of our senators for some congressionally directed spending and have asked us so that they can prepare for that to make available of the $327,000 that we committed, $127,000 now, so that they can finish the final design of that project. I expect that as soon as we get our second round of ARPA money, this project will qualify for that, and that you'll see an ordinance come to you for that $127,000 to help the Board of Waterworks fund that model, in the hopes that we can get grants to complete the projects. Now, the risk we run, given the money now, is that we spend that $127,000 and contribute towards the model, and the project never gets built because they don't get a grant. But that's, I think, probably a risk worth taking. So you'll see a recommendation from us as soon as we get that second tranche of ARPA money to move forward on that.
Oh, okay. I think that's a little different than the email that you sent out, but I guess what I would like to see is some like what I just mentioned to Marissa, that some of those openings that we kind of hold on to in our budget that kind of seems to be a slush fund at the end of the year, that we kind of switch around for these new positions that you're looking for.
The mayor and Ms. Lano have nodded their heads, Councilor Winter.
All right,
So,
thanks.
Yeah. Councilor Tencio.
Oh, I actually have one more comment. So Marissa, are you saying that we're no longer shorthanded? I mean, all those positions are being filled?
No, we certainly have staffing challenges. There's no doubt about that, but we are in the process of filling many funded positions at this time. When I say many, I believe that our recruiter and out of my office is working on at least 75 vacancies right now that she's working on filling. So we are we're actively working on recruitment at all times. I think that some of the positions that used to kind of carry over year to year, that's less of an occurrence now. I think we have, I don't think that's as common as it used to be. So
I know we used to kind of balance the budget at the end of the year with those funds that.
Sure,
were
there
kind of
was
being held.
there were salary savings used for that purpose, but I do think that we are, in a much more active recruitment phase right now. I don't see as many of those, vacancies just sort of hanging on year to year.
Well, I don't know, kind of back on the spillway. I mean, it's just kind of the beginning of summer, and I think that project really needs some attention before we have more deaths.
Counselor Atencio.
Yeah, I have all the confidence in the world in your office, Mr. Mayor, and in the Public Works and Planning departments. They're those directors, and they know exactly what they need to staff and do a good job in terms of those departments. I'm glad to hear of all these developments that are happening on the perimeter of our city. The problem I have is that our inner city neighborhoods, our older neighborhoods, are just being, we're not doing anything with them. We have to, again, a housing affordability plan. How are we going to resurrect these inner city, these older neighborhoods, the Lower East Side, things like that? Something has to be done. God bless all the upper middle class people that are going to come to Pueblo and buy all these big houses on the outskirts of town. We need them, we want them, but our older neighborhoods are falling apart. They keep deteriorating, and just seems like we're not doing anything about them. We got to do something.
Any other questions or comments for the mayor? To Councilor Atencio's point, I did see several affordable housing developments listed in there, including the Colorado Fuel and Iron Building, the Water Tower Place, and then the Pikes Peak Park that's run by NeighborWorks.
Yeah, and I'll just let counselors know that we have had inquiries, and we have spent a lot of time working with individual developers on what they say will be affordable housing on the west side, not exactly infill in some over neighborhoods, but they're neighborhoods that were platted in the 1800s, never been built on. And so we're having some struggles, we're having some challenges moving forward there, but we're trying to make it as economical as possible for them to put those housing units in there. One guy wants to build some modular units there. He infilled some property over in West Park, or well over on Orange Street, over Cherry Lane, Orange, in that part west of the park, a lot of vacant lots over there. He did a really good job putting in some modular houses and that kind of stuff in some of those older communities that are more affordable than they otherwise would. So we're working hard with those kind of people as well to try to help them accomplish their projects, but it's not without its legal challenges sometime. And I wouldn't be surprised if we'll come to council and say, hey, we need your help on this because we need to make an exception here. We have to bend the rules a little bit in order to allow this project to go forward. So just I want to make sure you're aware of that we're doing everything we can to get those affordable housing projects underway and make it easy for them to do and trying to not cost them a lot of money.
The problem I have is that affordable housing today is 275, 290, 300, 350,000. That leaves the lower end of our economic people with nothing. We're not doing anything. I spoke to some developers that would love to do some row housing where an average home owner occupied would only be closer to 180, 190 when they don't have to build on a big lot. They just buy a condominium basically on a row house. Things like that would make it more affordable for that lower end to be able to get into homes. And we have availability in our older neighborhoods to do that.
Yeah.
And I don't mean rentals, I mean owner occupied. It's all fine and good, you know, affordable houses if you could afford a $290,000, $300,000, $400,000, $350,000 home, that's affordable to you, but it's not affordable to our lower end of our economic ladder. And those are the people I'm talking about. You know, somebody making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, an affordable house is a $290,000 home. You know, somebody making $30,000, $40,000 a year, that's not affordable to them. So those are the people I'm thinking about. If you're able to get into a $300,000 home and you're making $60,000 a year, God bless you. But it's not helping our lower end people at all.
Councilor Maestri.
Yes, I agree with Larry, especially over there on the east side. That's becoming gentrification, not revitalization. And when we get gentrification, the native Puebloans don't have a place to go. And so on the existing older neighborhoods, that's what we're starting to see is a lot of gentrification, just like up in Denver. And then Denverites had to move out. We don't want to do that.
Not on the lowest. So gentrification.
Well, I don't know, you know, I watched the real estate market really well. I've seen them up to over 300,000, some of those redos, you know, so it's happening.
Well, Mayor, I appreciate the update for the Planning and Public Works Department. We look forward to seeing that as an ordinance on the regular meeting agenda. Our last agenda item is the Colorado House Bill 22-1024, also presented by the mayor. So take it away.
Thank you, Council and Madam Chair. I wanted to get a sense from the council. I've talked to several of you about this matter. In the last session of the legislature passed House Bill 1024, and the governor signed that bill, despite the protests of the Colorado Municipal League, that this bill is unconstitutional and infringes upon the rights of home rule cities such as Pueblo. That bill essentially says that home rule cities cannot impose a sales or use tax on the materials or equipment that go into a public education project. That's what the legislature did essentially. There are at least 5 home rule cities that tax public education projects. The materials that go into them, Pueblo is one of them. We do that. Denver taxes them as well. I was at a meeting at the Colorado Municipal League last week for the purpose of discussing this bill. The city of Denver intends to file a lawsuit against the state alleging that the bill is unconstitutional, and they have inquired whether the city of Pueblo would join in that lawsuit. It does not require us to allocate any resources. We simply add our name to the litigation there, and just obviously we're right in the middle of this. This couldn't have come at a worse time probably for the city of Pueblo because of the school construction we have going on. Hasn't been completed yet, hasn't been audited. I asked our finance department to give me an estimate of what would be on the table here. And they sort of gave me an estimate depending on whether, 30% of the materials were taxable or 40% of the materials were taxable. We won't know that till the project is done, but from probably the max at 40% that we'd miss out on if this bill is allowed to stand is about $4 million, $3,999,108 is what the city of Pueblo would lose in sales tax from the construction of these buildings if that happens. Part of the problem I've got, especially right now, is those buildings were budgeted and the bond issue was passed by the citizens with the sales tax built in. So it's not like the school district's got to go scramble and get the money that they weren't expecting to pay. This was built in when those bond issues were passed. So the low end maybe is like 2.63 million if it's taxed on 30%. So it has significant consequences to the city. The Municipal League, Colorado Municipal League, sent well, you have a copy of the letter that they sent to the governor, asking it to be vetoed. It's a thoroughly thoughtful letter, research that says, hey, this is clearly unconstitutional. These are the reasons why. The governor signed it anyway, so the courts are going to have to decide, is this constitutional or not? If the city gets a decision, if the city of Denver gets a decision, then that'll probably be binding on us. If nobody does anything, when it comes time for these projects to be finished, we'll audit them, we'll ask for the sales tax, and if they don't pay it, they'll have to, the burden will be on them to show why they don't have to pay it. And if they point to this, then we'll litigate that constitutional argument ourselves rather than have the city of Denver litigate that constitutional argument. They have many more lawyers on their staff in Denver. They have lawyers that are prepared to do it. And as I say, this will be at no cost to the city. So I'd like to get a sense from the council about how you feel about this House bill and its interference. And I think part of the municipal league's problem is that this might just be the first step. If the legislature thinks they can get away with this, then what's to keep them from saying home rule cities, you can't tax nonprofits on their construction projects, or you can't tax religious institutions on their construction projects. And it obviously doesn't cost the state any money because it's not the state sales tax that they're giving away, it's the city's sales tax. So that's, I think, part of the reason why I think it's probably important that we participate in this and try to be proactive, try to get a ruling so that the taxpayers and everybody know as soon as possible. And I'm going to stop there because I know I'm the only thing standing between you and the final period or two of the Avalanche game that we all want to get there and see. If anybody knows the score, I don't know. I haven't been tracking it. Huh? 1-1? Uh-oh, okay. So what's the sense of the council?
Counselor Tencio.
Yeah, I'm on the executive board of the CML, so this topic has come up during our board meetings. And it is very important to our home rule cities. Not only that, but we're home rule cities. We get to charge our taxes the way that we see fit. The state shouldn't be coming down telling us how to run our business, so to speak. So I'm hoping that we have a consensus that we are going to join this lawsuit. The CML will have an amicus brief on it. They will have their legal department heavily involved. So when the subject does come up during the board meetings, I'm able to speak as a united front for this council.
So Counselor Winter, the mics were on. So Counselor Martinez Ortega was a no, Counselor Graham was a yes, Counselor Atencio is a yes, Counselor Flores is a yes, Counselor Maestri. If we're going to join the lawsuit or not.
I'm sorry, what was that? Yes.
Counselor Maestri is a yes, Counselor Winter, any thoughts?
I do have a question. As a home rule city, you can only have laws that are more strict, I guess, than the state. So I don't know how this is even doable, really. I mean, how do you come in and say, I just don't see how that's even a lawsuit. Seems like that.
This is a tax issue, not a law issue. We can impose our own taxes as a home rule city.
Okay, but this is going to be a state law, correct?
Right, but it's the Constitution of the state of Colorado that authorizes home rule cities to impose taxes.
Yeah.
So to the extent that the legislature preempts that, that's unconstitutional. And that's what the lawsuit will be about.
That's what it's about.
Right. I just don't understand how that's unconstitutional, but I'm going to go with no.
You're a no?
I'm a no.
No?
She said no.
She said no.
Mayor, excuse me, but aren't they already state tax exempt schools?
Are they state tax
Yeah,
exempt
so like they don't have to pay state taxes
on building materials?
on the building
That's true.
materials. Mhm,
Right.
okay.
Right.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So it sounds like the majority are for it.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's all I had.
Great. It's 7:48 and I conclude this work session, seeing no other business.